Look at that, absolutely perfect and elegant and beautiful. No, that sounds really bad. It's not that kind of channel. We'll be baking. I was kind of roughhousing it a little bit.
Oh my goodness, what is that? It's a leopard.
My name's Taryn and I'm a professional baker from South Africa. I've baked some crazy, weird and wonderful cakes in my time. And now I hope to pass those skills on to you as I bake, make and create with the Supermoms Club.
It's a leopard tortoise. So I've been patiently waiting to film the guinea fowl that have been chitter-chattering in the background. I'm sure you can hear them. And this little one has just slowly waltzed into my property.
Welcome to episode 3. I'm so excited about today's episode because although we're just making vanilla cake, this vanilla cake recipe is so versatile, and it was really the recipe that I used to bake all of those amazing cakes when I was baking professionally. And today we are going to really put it through its paces. We're going to dress it up and strip it down. No, that sounds really bad. It's not that kind of channel. We'll be baking. We are going to decorate this cake in 5 different ways so that you can really see what can be done with just a simple vanilla cake. So without further ado, let's get into the ingredients. You'll need 4 eggs, 2 cups of sugar, 3 teaspoons of vanilla essence, a pinch of salt, a cup of sunflower oil, a cup of milk, a teaspoon of white vinegar, 2.5 cups of flour, 2.5 teaspoons of baking powder, and 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda or bicarb. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to start with is to pop your oven on to 180 degrees Celsius or 360 degrees Fahrenheit. So before I start baking, I like to get my prep work done. Grease 2 20cm pans and then place baking paper all the way around. So to start the recipe off, you are going to pop 4 eggs into your mixer and then beat them on a medium to high speed until they are really light and fluffy. Now, light and fluffy can mean a million different things, but beat them until they become paler in colour. Alright, so next pop in the sugar and then beat until the sugar and the eggs are combined. So next we're going to be adding quite a few ingredients into the mixer. So you can start with the vanilla essence, then a pinch of salt, and then you can add the white spirit vinegar into the milk and give that a bit of a stir. Add the milk into the mixer and then the oil and beat until all the wet ingredients are combined. Alright, so at this point I like to switch my whisk attachment out on my mixer for a paddle attachment. If you don't have a stand-up mixer, that's absolutely fine. Continue exactly on with what you're using. And then you can pop the flour into the mix and then beat the ingredients until they're combined. Alright, so last and definitely not least, the baking powder and the baking soda can go into your mixer. And then make sure not to overbeat at this point because you want your cake to rise nicely. So you can kind of give it a beat for about 20 seconds or so, just so that it mixes nicely into the mixture. A really important aspect of cake baking is making sure that you have uniform cakes. So what I like to do is to pour the mixture into the pans, but then measure them on a kitchen scale so that each pan has the same amount of grams. So just pop your mixture into the pan and then just slightly adjust wherever you may need to. So these are roughly about 700 grams each. So the cakes are just about ready to go into the oven. But before I pop them in, I like to make sure that there aren't any air bubbles that are trapped inside the cake mix. So in order to get them out, what you can do is kind of give your pan a bit of a shake. And then you can plop it down as hard as you can onto the table. So block your ears. And this will help to bring up any air bubbles that are kind of trapped inside the mixture. And then you can use a toothpick and kind of just pop those excess bubbles that are sitting on top. And now they are ready to go into the oven. So you can pop them in for 30 to 35 minutes So from 30 minutes onwards, start checking your cakes. Once they're lovely and golden on top, then they're ready to come out. Wow, the sun has gone down really quickly today. My cakes have been in the oven for just over 35 minutes, and I'll take them out the oven now and then pop a skewer into them to double check that everything is fine. Oh, they smell absolutely amazing. So grab your skewer and pop it into the middle of the cake and look at that. Absolutely clean, baked to perfection. So now what I'll do is leave the cakes to cool completely. Once they are cold, then I'll pop them out the cake tin and then wrap them in some cling film and pop them in an airtight container overnight. This is where some kind of scientific magic happens, and by morning the cakes are going to be super moist and ready to be decorated, and that's when we'll get into decorating them in 5 different ways. So my cakes have had a really good night's rest. They smelled absolutely amazing as I opened that container, and while I think that that's probably one of the most exciting and best parts. But now, before we unwrap them, we're going to get into what you'll need to make the buttercream icing. And the ingredients are 100 grams of butter, 100 grams of white margarine, 100 grams of cream cheese, 3 teaspoons of vanilla essence, 600 grams of icing sugar, and a splash of milk. So what is buttercream icing? Well, buttercream icing is icing that has been made with butter. Now, this recipe may not be buttercream icing in the traditional sense because we are adding the cream cheese, but that cream cheese really helps to give it a lovely flavor and just make all the difference to the taste of your cake. So what you can do is just wait until your butter and your margarine have come to room temperature and then pop them into the mixer along with the cream cheese. And just as Bob Ross would say, beat the devil out of them until they are well combined. Alright, that is looking lovely and smooth. And that's exactly how it should be. There shouldn't be any little lumps of butter or margarine floating around in the mix at this point. Those little bits of butter will kind of show through in your icing and it really won't look nice. So next we are going to add the vanilla essence. Pop your sieve in and add the icing in quarter batches, beating in between. Alright, so that is looking really good. Now, if you live in a warmer climate, I wouldn't add the milk at all. You want your icing sugar to remain stable, especially if you're layering a cake or you're going to ice it and have it outside in hot weather. Obviously, butter melts and we don't want that to happen. So if you're in a colder climate or it is winter, you can add a dash of milk if it's needed. So now what you can do is set it aside and we are going to get straight into cutting the cake and layering it. So often you'll find that cakes can rise and kind of give a little bit of a cone, especially if you live at the coast. I think somehow the humidity does affect that. But the great thing about this recipe is that it has the baking soda, which does help to control it. So I'm sure you've often wondered how cake bakers, professional bakers, have these beautiful cakes that seem so flat and round and perfect. And trimming the cake is really the key to having a perfect cake. So you can unwrap your cake and then remove all the baking paper going all the way around. So I'm sure you noticed that while I was unwrapping the cake, I was kind of roughhousing it a little bit. And that's what's really fantastic about this recipe. So the cake is really moist, but it is nice and firm as well. And it really makes a lovely stable cake. So whether you are just making a simple cake for tea, or you are making a 3-dimensional cake, which you will need to kind of cut into the shape, this recipe is perfect for all of that. So to trim these cakes, I use 2 tools, and that is just a normal braid knife and a spirit level. So all you do is just lightly start in one section and then slowly work your way going all the way around. And these make lovely little scraps to kind of munch on in between. So then check it with the spirit level, and there we go, absolutely perfect. So before I begin, I like to take just a little dab of icing sugar and then pop it onto the cake board or a plate, whichever you'll be using, and then place the cake with the bottom side down just on top of that in the middle of your board. And you can give it a good old press. So now the cake is stable. It's not really going to fall off too much, and you can kind of move it around, and it does just help to stabilize your cake. So next you can use a knife or a spatula like this one, and then pop the icing going all the way around the middle of the cake. So try and get your icing as flat as you possibly can. As soon as you place this cake on top, if this is out of balance and it's slightly higher in one side, you're going to have a bit of a lopsided cake. So it's really important to get that nice and flat, and then turn your cake upside down and pop it on top. And then what you can do again is take your spirit level and place it on top and make sure that your cake is nicely leveled. Perfect. All the boring bits of cake baking are over, and it's time to get into the fun part and decorate this cake in 5 different ways. So for each of them, I'll pop up a picture with a timestamp. If you're interested in decorating it in that way, please feel free to jump forward and watch that specific tutorial. So for the first cake, we will simply ice it with vanilla icing and then place some fresh strawberries on top. Perfect for spring. Then we'll dirty ice the cake and place some fresh flowers on top, really giving it a classical look. Then we'll re-ice the cake and pop some chocolate going all the way around with some fresh flowers. And then we'll strip it back and get into doing some chocolate ganache on the top with some macaroons and fresh flowers, and really just make a lovely, fun, beautiful cake. And then lastly, we are going to fondant the cake with some royal icing going all the way around in a stencil pattern. Alright, so this first cake is really simple. So what you'll do is just pop some icing onto your spatula or onto a knife, and then place it all the way around the top of the cake. So this cake doesn't have to be perfectly done. Be wavy and kind of just placed haphazardly on top. There we go. So now to add the strawberries on top. Alright, so we are almost done with this baby. So to cut the strawberries, cut your top off, and then cut them in half down the center, and then cut them again in half, each segment in half. So in other words, you will have 4 little pieces of strawberry. Right, then you can place them going any way you like, really, all the way around the top of the cake. And then you can pop some into the sides as well. Perfect and lovely and fresh. And you can top it off with a little bow on the side and some fresh flowers. Perfect to celebrate spring. Absolutely beautiful and so simple. And now it's time to strip it off. Alright, so the strawberries are off and it's time to get into the next cake, which is going to just be dirty iced with some flowers on top. So what I'm going to do is now strip all of this icing off, and then I can reuse it now for the next cake. So it may have a slight little bit of a strawberry taste, but hey, that's absolutely fine. So dirty icing or crumb coating really is what you do before you ice a cake properly. So top to bottom, you would first crumb coat it and then let that dry. So now all that you are going to do is just place icing very thinly going all the way around the cake. So kind of little bits of cake are going to show, and that is exactly how it should be. So scrape your knife off and then kind of go all the way around the cake, just smoothing it out. It really doesn't need to be perfect. It is just a simple, simple way of icing a cake. And I think it looks really stunning. Okay, so the cake is dirty iced, and now you can pop just a little ribbon going all the way around at the bottom. And you can just gently run your finger along it so that it fits nice and snugly on the cake. And then place a little sprig of flowers on top with some ribbon, and then let it drape over the cake. Simplistic and beautiful. And now it's time to strip it off and onto the next cake, which we'll start by preparing the chocolate strips. Using some baking paper, mark out 11 6cm by 15cm strips. So for a cake of this size, you'll roughly need 250 to 300 grams of chocolate. I use baking chocolate. I do find that it is a lot more forgiving if you need to reheat the chocolate if it starts to harden. And also I melt it in the microwave. Now I know the microwave can be a bit temperamental and it's quite easy to burn your chocolate. So pop your microwave on 50% power, and then every 30 seconds take your dish out, give it a stir, and then repeat this process until your chocolate is completely melted. Then add 10 ml of sunflower oil and give it a stir again. So I want to let it cool just for a little bit, just until I can feel it slightly starting to thicken, because it is going to just make it a bit easier that it won't spread on the paper so fast. So that is about right. And now with my center line, I have my arrow showing me where I need to be pouring. So the center line is essentially what we'll be cutting for the base of the cake. And then this top section is going to be the section that will kind of scallop and flow over the top of the cake. So I am going to start with the scalloped edge and then run my chocolate all the way along the baking paper. So now you need to work pretty quickly, and then just with a knife, spread it in between all the lines, and then run your knife going around the top so that you can kind of give it a little bit of a scalloped edge, and then get it down to your bottom line. So while I'm waiting for the chocolate to harden, may as well not waste time, and let's get into icing the cake. So it is dirty iced already, and so now all we need to do is to add icing going all the way around the sides, and you can make it as thick as you like. So now you move on to using a spatula, and then you can spread the icing going evenly all the way from the bottom to the top of the cake. And now you can add some to the top as well. So as you can see, a really untidy ice, but the icing is even going all the way around the top and the sides of the cake. So now there is a little bit of a trick. You can pop your spatula into some very hot water and then kind of just let that knife blade heat up, and then drip off the excess water, and then start spreading the icing going all the way around, and then it will smooth it off really nicely. So now when you get to the top, you can start on your corners and then just pull your knife into the middle of the cake, smoothing it off nicely. So now it's time to start cutting the chocolate. So you can use just a normal kitchen knife and then heat your blade either on a gas stove or even with a blowtorch, and then start cutting along the lines that you have made on your paper. Alright, so I have now cut all the chocolate, and what I'm going to do is take the chocolate off the paper and then just trim each one down individually. Alright, so all of my little chocolate pieces are done and cut, and they're ready to go onto the cake. So what I've done is just make a very kind of sloppy mix of icing. So I've just added just a tad of milk into the icing and just made it kind of just a little bit more runny than what it usually is. And then what you can do is just add a little bit of the icing to the back part of the chocolate and then secure it onto the cake. As you can see, I've got some taller pieces of chocolate and some shorter ones, and I'll arrange them tall, short, working my way around the cake. Wow, pretty much a perfect fit. So now to top this cake off and finish it off, I've made a little posy that can be placed on top of the cake, and then you can just fill in any extra little gaps that you have with the flowers to make sure that your posy is looking beautiful and round. Look at that, absolutely perfect. And now it's time to strip it off and get onto the next cake. Alright, so it is now time to move on to doing cake number 4, and that is going to be a chocolate drizzle cake. I'm really excited about this one. So what I'm going to do is leave this icing on now and just kind of fix it up. If you have jumped forward and you're not too sure how to ice the cake exactly like this, you can go back to this timestamp and then you'll be able to see exactly how to ice a cake in this way. So again, I am going to place my spatula into some hot water, and then I'll use it to smooth over the cake. And then just very carefully go around the top and kind of finish off your corners again so that everything is looking nice and even and straight. So I'm happy with that. And now it is on to making the ganache that will cover the top of this cake. So all you need is to pop 80 ml of pouring cream into a saucepan on the stove. Let the cream come just to the boil, and then add 300 grams of white chocolate and some colorant, and then give it a stir until all the chocolate is melted and the mixture becomes lovely and silky and smooth. Place some ganache into a piping bag and attach a small piping tip. Right, so now you can just kind of go along the side of the cake and then drizzle down wherever you would like your drizzle. So I really do find that using the piping bag and piping tip really do give you a lot more control with your drizzle. If you haphazardly pour your ganache over the top of the cake, it can really just turn out an absolute mess. So this is really the easiest way to control that drizzle. Right, so now for the rest of the ganache, give it a little bit of a stir before you start, and really take it nice and slow. You don't want to overwhelm the cake either with it. And then start from the middle of the cake and spread it around the top using a spoon. Alright, so now on to decorating this cake. So first I am going to start just down here and pop a rose in and work my way going all the way up. Okay, so now I've used from the previous cake just some of the side pieces of chocolate that will then just add to giving a little bit of height to the cake. So they can just kind of be popped in, and you can use anything you want really, anything that will just give you a bit of height. And then again you can start working your way around, and then in between you can pop some other little goodies like macaroons and maybe some chocolate balls, and then you can add just a couple of sprinkles as well. You can pop in a contrasting color like red. It will just really help to bring it alive. So there you have it, a beautiful drip cake. So easy, who would have thought? And now it's time to strip it all down and get onto fondanting this cake. So yesterday I had every intention of getting all 5 cakes done in one day, but unfortunately life happens, and on my way home from fetching my son I hit a pothole, and that was the end of that. No more tire. So sometimes it happens. Yesterday I was also without power twice, so if you kind of saw my lighting doing all sorts of stuff, I'm really sorry, but it was out of my control. And well, it's South Africa's favorite attributes, of course, potholes and power outages. But I'm here and ready to do this next cake. So what we are going to start with is to crumb coat or dirty ice the cake. Obviously I stripped back everything off of the previous cake, and then what I did is actually flip the cake upside down because it was a little bit dented and dinged on the other side, but this side is absolutely perfect now, and that's a really important thing when fondanting a cake. You want the cake to be nice and even and straight, because if it's not, it's going to show when you fondant. So you can just take a very light little bit of icing and then pop it over the cake. So if you've skipped forward, you will be doing this all the way around the cake. Obviously now this cake has got icing on the sides, but you would just do a really thin little coat of icing so that it holds the crumbs, and hence the name crumb coat. So that then when you ice, you don't get these little bits of cake all in between your icing, and it really does just help to keep your cake nice and smooth and great. So now I'm going to leave the cake to dry for just a couple of minutes and then get onto icing it before we fondant. So my crumb coat is dried, and now I want to place some icing going all the way around the cake and on top. Now obviously I do have icing around the cake from yesterday, and so I'll kind of just refresh that because it did stand overnight. And then you are going to place quite a thin-ish layer, probably about 4 mils or so of icing going all the way around the top and the sides of the cake. So fondant can be quite unforgiving. Any little bumps or lumps or dents in your cake are going to show once it's fondanted. So you really need to ensure that at this point you get your icing as smooth and straight as possible. So another problem is also these edges going around the cake. Often if you put too much icing, the fondant, when you place it over, kind of falls off on the sides, and then it creates more of a rounded edge than a nice straight edge, and you want a nice straight edge. So there is a little bit of a trick to it, and we'll get to that just in a few seconds. So now I'm going to continue to place the icing going all the way around. Alright, so now you'll come back to your top edge and then use your palette knife just to kind of swish from the outside, working your way in so that you can get a nice straight edge. And if you kind of see that your cake isn't looking 100% level, then just fill in with a bit of icing wherever you need to. Alright, so I'm happy with that. So here is my top little tip. What you can do is pop the cake into the freezer for 5 to 10 minutes. You kind of want this icing to set, let's say, and get a little bit more hard so that when you pop the fondant over it, it's not going to kind of flow on those edges, and it's going to keep a straighter edge. So now while the cake is in the freezer, we can get onto rolling the fondant. So now you need to knead your fondant, and an absolute must-have to fondant a cake is a fondant rolling mat. If you don't have one, I'm afraid you are not going to get this right. So what I do is just kind of knead the fondant for probably 5 to 10 minutes. You just want it nice and silky and smooth. And if you find that it's sticking to your hands, you can use just a little bit of white margarine, but really just a small amount, almost like you were creaming your hands. And then you can kind of just put it on your hands and then continue to knead your fondant. So after about 5 minutes of kneading, you'll see that your fondant becomes nice and warm and a lot more pliable. So if you are wanting to color your fondant, I would kind of do it at that stage and then continue to knead your fondant until all the colorant is nicely and evenly through. So for a 20 centimeter or 8-inch cake, you're going to need roughly 800 grams of fondant, and then you are going to roll it to around a 43 centimeter diameter or 17 inches. So just pop your fondant in the middle of your rolling mat and kind of give it a bit of a press down. Alright, so my fondant is under the mat, and now I will begin to roll it out. So start from the center and then gradually work your way around your circle and gradually increase the width and diameter of your circle as you go around. So try and keep it as even as possible. Once you've rolled your fondant, hold it up to the light, and then double check that there aren't any air bubbles that have formed during the rolling process. So I've just grabbed my cake out the freezer. The icing has hardened, which is great. That's exactly what I wanted it to do. And now with this very tiny amount of icing that I have left, I've added just a little bit of milk, because you kind of want this to go on top and just be spread over the top so that the fondant will actually stick to it. So it can kind of be this consistency. And now you can just use your palette knife again and then just very quickly smear it over the top and the sides of the cake. Alright, so the cake is ready to get the fondant. So now you are going to take your underneath side of your mat off and then center the fondant over the top of the cake. And then you can just gently pull the mat off, and as you go you can use a tool like this and then just kind of pull your fondant out, and then you're going to smooth it down with the tool. So at this stage you really want to make sure that you're not going to get any air bubbles, and then kind of just very gently pull the fondant down and then work your way going all the way around the cake so it doesn't ruffle like a dress. Alright, so the cake is now fondanted all the way around. If you happen to have any little air bubbles that form, what you can do is just take a little pin and then pop the air bubble. Don't make too big of a hole, but when you go over it with this little tool again, it will kind of go back together and you won't really see it at all. So now we need to trim the excess fondant off around the bottom of the cake. Okay, so with using just a normal kitchen knife, you can place your blade edge facing inwards and then slice it going all the way around. And then you can kind of just open your fondant up and then gently peel it away. So now there may be some little excess bits of fondant, and you can just take your knife and scrape those off. And then with the blade facing inwards again, you can press in your bottom edge so that it's nice and neat. So we're almost done. So next we are going to make some royal icing, which we'll then stencil around the sides of the cake. So to make the royal icing, you're going to need 60 ml of warm water, a tablespoon and a half of acti white or meringue powder, then a pinch of cream of tartar and 300 grams of icing sugar. So it's really easy. So you can pop your acti white or meringue powder into your warm water and then whisk it for about 30 seconds or so until it's nice and fluffy. Alright, so now you can add the cream of tartar, so just a pinch, and then whisk it again for another 30 seconds. So now with the paddle attachment on your mixer, you can pop the icing sugar and this mixture into your mixer and then beat it on a really low speed for about 10 minutes until it's nice and silky and smooth. Alright, so my royal icing is done. It should be the consistency of toothpaste, really, kind of thick toothpaste. So you want to keep it in your mixer and keep it covered because you don't want it to dry out. It does tend to dry out pretty quickly. And then you can place your stencil onto the cake. So what I find really helps with the stencil is to use some pins and then find a small little place that you can just pop your pin into so that you can secure your stencil nicely onto the cake. So I find just 4 pins on the stencil really helps to secure it. And then you can give quite a generous scraping onto your palette knife and then pop that onto your stencil and drag it across, keeping an even thickness of the royal icing, and then remove your pins and gently peel off the stencil. So in between applications, what you should really do is now give this a rinse off, dry it, and then repeat and go all the way around the cake. Finished off with some beautiful fresh flowers, perfect for spring. So one cake decorated in 5 different ways. We definitely put it through its paces and it's held perfectly. So now I am going to have a very well-deserved cup of tea and a slice of this beautiful cake. In next week's episode, the perfect cupcake recipe and some pro decorating tips.